our first presenter, Rohail Hyatt, who is a well, multifaceted. How to introduce him? Um, he is a band member, a producer, a songwriter, a guitarist, a keyboardist, and he's also played a very important role in producing this a program that appears on in Pakistani TV, but also through the YouTube. It's called Coke Studio, and uh, a program that highlights different types of musics of Pakistan, but many of them immersed in the mystical traditions of Pakistan, and has a tremendous impact in trying to create a kind of a virtual community, if you will, of people who are interacting with each other uh, in an environment where there are lots of divisions. So, with that, Royal, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning and salam, everybody. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Catherine, for having me here. It's indeed an honor and a privilege. I would like to share from the beginning an insider perspective on it was really insightful to hear everybody speak yesterday, and the positivity was really nice to witness. But as a musician growing up in Pakistan and facing the kind of opposition you may, for a lot of people, music is haram. And strangely enough, I would agree to it to some degree. They can be good and bad in everything. And one needs to identify, uh, which part of it can be harmful and which part of it can be positive. So on that context, I don't mind the fact, but when it's done and blocked, that's perhaps when the issues start. So I'll share an insider perspective as to how one survived in that environment and what sort of mindset one perhaps needs to exist even in a place like perhaps Pakistan. One of the first things is that religion has become almost like a membership of a club. You're offered it for the advantages that you may have to, go to a country club. You're sold certain incentives to join in. Just very recently, I was offered to join a certain sect or a group, and the incentives were quite interesting. I was told, very, other than the fact that I was offered the Abi Zamzam and the dates, I was offered no issues from the tax department ever again, and and that I'd be very powerful. I'd be able to make a phone call, and whoever I'd make the call to would take that call. Powerful incentives to join in because I have a bit of a name. So that added with membership of the club would entitle me these privileges. That's unfortunately what the face of religion has become, and what it means to join in. I chose to seek my own path, find my own ways, read the Quran for what I thought it said to me. I didn't feel I needed, if in the true sense of the first kalma, which is, the commandment, is that nobody between me and my God, no ilah between me and Allah, I'd say I think I'm very much in, my entitlement to find my own answers. And if the book should speak to me, it will speak to me, and it did. And I found my own interpretations. I found my own way of praying. I found my own way of, and so I'm a classic non-Muslim by the definitions of all the people who go around saying who is a Muslim and who isn't a Muslim. But here's the thing. I feel why I can get away with it, why I'm not chased out of my own home or my house burned down or my studio burned down, is because I don't have a tag displaying that I'm X, Y, or Z. I'm a Muslim, and that's all that matters to me. Anybody who asks me what kind gets the idea, the Muslim kind. There isn't a subdivision beyond that. So, I mean, if you want to burn me for that, go ahead. But, can you? They don't. It's the divisions that cause divisions, in my opinion. So, Pakistan, sadly enough, has been the victim of, in the last decade, since, yesterday we vowed to have a very open sort of discussion on matters. I'm going to come to the creative art form very soon, but, I also have to reflect upon what was being said. We thought we'd have a very open discussion. Pakistan's been this victim of media abuse beyond words. You have no idea what the psychological effects that has on a nation. Anything. I mean, it eventually became a joke. CNN and BBC, they almost like clockwork in synchronicity. They would just, any little thing that would happen would be amplified beyond belief. We just couldn't get it. We back home just were not getting. There were other places with extreme. I mean, there are extremists everywhere, aren't there? There are extremists in all kinds of. There's the Hindu extremists. There's the white supremacy extremists. They're all up to things, but somehow it's the Muslim extremist that gets all the media coverage. And I really, in a forum like this, want to ask why. Why that is so. Is it because they're a threat? Is it because, we back home need, our youth needs these answers, because what happens is with such a lot of negativity, more negativity is born. And in that, we have youth growing up isolated, feeling like the world shuns them, and that in turn has such a that's what's fueling the growth. That's how the recruitments for the Taliban are happening. It's the isolation. So, most of the time, if you see it from the insider perspective, you have these dictators who come into power because they're allies of the West, and they're the ones who've brought in most of the draconian laws. There was no blasphemy law before Ziaul Haq, as we mentioned yesterday as well. His plane mysteriously goes down one day when he's no longer needed by the West. And here we are left with the remnants of what he left behind. And it might have something to do with that fact that Pakistan's a nuclear country and thus gets all the attention. Because I was once speaking to the British ambassador who said to me an interesting thing. He said, Rohail, we would like to see a stable Pakistan, but never a strong one. And that resonated with me, that, maybe there is something that's playing at a much bigger level. But anyway, coming back to the more positive things, I feel spirituality is an inherent right of every individual. It's on another layer consumed by what we call religion. And I personally found Islam to talk to me at a very spiritual level. I believe religion's a different layer. On a one-on-one, it's a spiritual connect that one finds. Maybe perhaps because I'm more creatively inclined, I found, and I think other people will also agree with me, I found the Quran to be a book of poetry. Language has limitations. And when you can't take bigger concepts and put them into words, poetry comes along to help use your imagination. It's allegorical. It can never be made literal. Anybody who understands Arabic or speaks it fluently will realize that the older Arabic, why it was so magnificent to the people who received the Quran for the first time was because it's a work of art. It's wow, the poetry in it. It's transcending. It's not limited to its literal interpretation. And luckily for me, I've found, even in interpretation, its, its poetic connotations. And that, for me, opened up a very different kind of Quran, the relevance of all the prophets mentioned. Otherwise, what's the relevance? Why is Hazrat Ibrahim or Hazrat Yusuf, or, you know, in that bigger light, I saw how that was my own life being talked about for me. How Hazrat Ibrahim, or Abraham, suggested the, the sacrifice of the world. Hazrat Yusuf or Joseph was, dealing with vanity issues. Hazrat Musa or Moses was, about the laws. But not just the laws of the prophet, the laws that affect me in my life. And likewise, Hazrat Isa, or Jesus was the point of divine revelation, immaculate conception. When it starts happening to you yourself, conceptually, wahi, where ideas that transcend your own ability to compute. And likewise, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the final seal, freedom. I now need nobody. Beyond him will not come another messenger, because we do not need one now. It's opened the door for me to communicate directly with God. So that's the kind of effect poetry was having in its interpretation of the Quran on a creative mind. And unfortunately, on the flip side, what was happening was the kind of Islam one was being exposed to was that of, from a very early childhood, a Maulvi will come to the house and he will teach you. And it was the fear of God. As a child, it was traumatizing to know that my brains would boil over and my, come out of my ears. And there was this God of fear that was put in me. And along with that, there was a superiority complex as well. Oh, but your heaven is guaranteed. You're a Muslim. You're going straight to heaven. You can do whatever you want. Oh, you will spend a little time in hell, but heaven is guaranteed. That's not what the Quran told me. That's just not what it says. So I don't know. These were the contradictions one was left dealing with. So anyway, you grow up in this environment, you find your own solutions, and you find that everything's a symptom of imbalance or balance. And in Pakistan, what you see usually is an imbalance of things. When we say extremists, it just suggests that there's a neutral. There's one end of the extreme, which is the right. There's the other end of the extreme, which is the left. We tend to think the left extremists are okay, and it's the right that's the problem. No. Extremism on any end of the spectrum is lopsided. It's off balance. It's the liberal extremists that you have to be worried about too. Facebook is full of them. They're the ones who cry murder the moment something goes. They hang them by the, why don't they catch the Taliban and hang them by the poles? What? I mean, same rhetoric, but these are the acceptable extremists. The other ones that are on the right are the ones. So I find both unnecessarily vile, sorry, for my liking. It's the neutral, it's the center, perhaps that we need to be worried about. So we were confronted with a situation which needed a creative solution. Back in Pakistan, and in other countries as well, we find that we have these divides, social divides, economic divides. We've got older people and younger people who are not seeing eye to eye. We've got income group issues. So likewise, we had these issues, and we wanted to create an environment in which the neutral became a place that people could come to meet, a meeting ground. That project was called Coke Studio, and it was an uphill task. A Jewish American company wanting to do something in Pakistan, wanting to, you're starting off on the wrong foot when it comes to, the odds, and um, it won so many hearts and souls. We got crazy because here's what happened. We created a middle ground, and and perhaps in it is a solution for when we talk about Shia and Sunni and we take them as two opposites. Here's probably a solution. The solution that might have worked for Coke Studio might also go along and work for others. As a producer, this is what I would do. I'd go to one end of the spectrum, I'd go to the older artist or the more traditional artist, and I'd say, Sir, what do we have to look after in your realm of existence? How do you do music? And they'd say, oh, well, these are what are important values to us. Noted. Then we'd go to the other end. Well, as being the more modern musician, I knew what happened on this end of the spectrum. And I'd know, okay, Western music was all about these values. This gentleman who plays this Eastern instrument and sings on the basis of Eastern tuning values needs this to feel comfortable. So a center ground is created where everybody feels comfortable. The center ground has the values that are shared values, right? This gentleman doesn't have to go too far onto that side. The requirement from the left is not that the right joins the left or the left joins the right. They meet in a center ground. And that is what created the magic. And it didn't just create the magic for the people who performed on it, the listeners had the same effect. I was told the show has family values. I was told that the show, um, you know, uh, was not excessive in showing skin, and at the same time, was not just knots and thing. It was a middle ground where things came together and met. So rather than finger pointing and perhaps always accusing the other, there's a Chinese proverb that says, he who points a finger at the other is pointing three at himself. And that's so true. We have to stop doing that. We have to, it's the change is here. It's not out there. If I am an Ahmadi, which I'm not, but if I was one, I don't need to announce it. It's here, it's in my heart. If I'm a Shia, if I'm a Sunni, we don't need to, I believe we need to bring the change in our hearts. And that's how we need to talk to people about the changes they need to have in their hearts. I've been given hugs by people with long beards for having done Coke Studio. Unthinkable at a time, at airports and stuff. It's just been a fantastic experience, and I know it works, so that's what I'm trying to reiterate over here, that it works. One last thing I will say is there's a thing about positivity. If it is equated to light, then light has this fundamental power over darkness, as positivity does over negativity. A small bit of light will consume a lot of darkness, but you can bring as much darkness into a room, it'll never consume that little bit of light. Positivity is what's needed, I believe, in the Islamic world today. Thank you.
So our next presenter is Syed Akbar Hyder, um, who I want to welcome back to Harvard. Akbar did his PhD here in Near Eastern languages and civilizations, and then went on to get a faculty position at the University of Texas, Austin, where he's an associate professor of Asian studies and Islamic studies, and he's also associate director of their Urdu Hindi flagship program. He has several publications, but he is particularly fascinated with poetry and the role that poetry plays in Muslim societies. Uh, he's uh, he's a walking encyclopedia of Urdu poetry. He just has everything memorized. So again, an amazing person. I think his whole worldview is influenced by poetry. So with that, I will hand over to Akbar.
Thank you so much, Professor Sani. Thank you, Catherine, for making these arrangements. And I don't say this because he is my teacher and mentor, but I think any of us who is here on this panel can attest that only Ali Asani can pull this off. Bringing in people from so many different walks of life and having such a sort of glorious representation of a cross section, not just of the Muslim community, but of the larger American community. I mean, this is something that he has been doing here for many years, and I think all of us should wish him well. So I am, yeah. Um, I will talk about poetry today, and I will focus on one poet, Muhammad Iqbal, who lived in the South Asian subcontinent, although also spent time in Europe. I will also recite some verses in the original languages, Persian and Urdu, so you get a sense of what these verses sound like in their context. You might not get every word of it, but I can assure you there's a certain musicality in poetry that you will appreciate. Okay, so with that, بیا که قاعده آسما بگردانیم قضا به گردش رتل گران بگردانیم. Come, join me. Let us alter the rules of the skies. With the twirl of the bumper, let us alter the decrees of fate. Thus sings the great 19th century poet, the last Mughal poet, Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib. These are the words that do not come to an end with Ghalib. They are quoted repeatedly, most notably in the works of another great luminary from the subcontinent, Muhammad Iqbal, frequently referred to as the poet of the East. These are Iqbal's dates. Now, I think I can argue here that there is no poet in the last millennium from Afghanistan to the Deccan Plateaus who has had more impact on the thought of Muslims, Shias, and Sunnis. Again, I say no poet within this region more than Muhammad Iqbal. Hence, I thought it would be very appropriate to pay tribute to him in today's talk. Now, what I will do today is talk about how Iqbal's poetry constitutes an important archive from which we can draw thoughts and inspirations, not only about interfaith dialogues, not only about interfaith conversations, but also about interfaith conversations. Here is an important quote from Iqbal. Science, philosophy, religion all have limits. Art alone is boundless. And in the few minutes I have today, I would like to raise the arts as an important archive and basically say a few words about what the art of Iqbal, especially the poetry of Iqbal, can add to our understanding of conversations among people. Now, the most important feature of poetry on which Iqbal relies is the ambiguity, what we in Urdu refer to as ibham. And this ibham is specially pronounced in the most cherished genre of Persia-Urdu poetry in the subcontinent and beyond, the genre of the ghazal. And many of you know that the ghazal is written from the perspective of a forlorn lover speaking to an indifferent, cruel beloved. It is this genre that Iqbal uses to relay his ideas about relationships among people. Poetry, to Iqbal, brings cultures together. He is acutely aware that civilizations are not mutually exclusive. There would not be a West without an East, and vice versa. An extremely important point. He pays tribute not only to some of the great poets of the Islamic world, the likes of Attar and Rumi, but also to some of the great Persian poets coming from Europe, namely Goethe. Here is a quote from Iqbal in which he brings these traditions together. I confess I owe a great deal to Hegel, Goethe, Mirza Ghalib, Mirza Bedel, and Wordsworth. The first two led me into the inside of things. The third and the fourth taught me how to remain Oriental in spirit. The last one saved me from atheism. The soul of Oscar Wilde is more Persian than English. I love this. I'm a big fan of Oscar Wilde. So, what Iqbal also finds appealing in the ghazal tradition, in the lyrical tradition, is the way in which the ghazal compels its readers to identify with a minority position. And this is really important in the light of yesterday's conversation. And this minority position becomes apparent in the most important poetic work that comes out in the subcontinent, what could argue, in the 20th century, Iqbal's majestic Javed Nama, very much inspired by the tradition of the Miraj of the Prophet. Now, Miraj Nama is published in 1932, and unfortunately, there is no Persian work that comes out of the subcontinent after the after the Javed Nama that even comes close to this epic poem. So here are some of the inspirations, some of the visual representations of the Miraj from which Iqbal draws. But one sphere, one stage of the journey that I would like to focus on today is the sphere of Jupiter, Falake Mushtari. And I find this sphere interesting for today's conversation because it is here that Iqbal encounters three persons from Islamic history. On the left, we have Mansur al-Hallaj, the great martyr, Sufi, who said An al-Haq. In the middle, we have Ghalib. And then, can anybody guess who is here? No? This is Qurratulain Tahira, the great Babi poet of 19th century Persia. So these are the three people who are brought together in a conversation on this planet. Now, Hallaj starts off the conversation not by his own words, but by quoting lines from a very prominent Mughal poet, Naziri, 17th century Persian poet, Naziri. Gurizat as-safe ma har ke marde ghoga neest, kase ke kushte nashud as qabila ma neest. Whoever flees from our ranks is not a man of strength. Whoever is not killed, he does not belong to our tribe. Yeah? So this is the celebration of martyrdom that Hallaj brings into the conversation. Then Ghalib adds to it with the ghazal with which I began the presentation, Bea ke qaide asma bagardanim. And then one of the couplets of the ghazal is very interesting. Nadim o mutrib o saqi ze anjuman ranim bakarobar zane kardan bagardanim. Fascinating idea here. Expel the boon companion, the singer, and the cupbearer. Instead, turn over the affairs to a competent woman. very few places where you actually hear the mention of a woman within the ghazal tradition. It's mostly a conversation between and among men. Yeah? So here is Ghalib's ghazal, and indeed, the next person we encounter is a prominent woman from 19th century, the poet Tahira. Garbatu uftad nazar, chehra ba chehra rubaru, share daham game tora, nukta ba nukta mu ba mu. If my glances land on you, if I come face to face with you, I shall spell out my sorrows to you, point by point, hair by hair. So it's this conversation between a person from Arab, Hallaj, a person from Ajam, Tahira, and a person from Hind, Ghalib. Iqbal writes, the fate of the world has been principally decided by minorities. The history of Europe bears ample testimony to the truth of this proposition. It seems to me that there is a psychological reason why minorities should have been a powerful factor in the history of mankind. Character is the invisible force which determines the destinies of nations, and an intense character is not possible in a majority. It is a force, the more it is distributed, the weaker it becomes. And within this minoritarian context, Iqbal cultivates the self, the individuality. And this self is cultivated through three traits, the three ains of Iqbal: ishq, passion, ilm, knowledge, and amal, action. This is a self that is conflicted, full of paradoxes. Iqbal is fully aware of these paradoxes, and he is confessional. Here, my favorite lines from Iqbal's Urdu poetry, in which sort of he is autobiographically describing himself. सुनता हूं कि काफिर नहीं हिंदू को समझता है ऐसा अकीदा असर फलसफादानी है इसकी तबीयत में तशय्युब भी ज़रा सा तफजील अली हमने सुनी इसकी ज़बानी समझा है कि है राग इबादत में है दाखिल मकसूद है मजहब की मगर खाक उड़ानी. I hear that he does not consider Hindu a kafir. Could this spring from a knowledge of philosophy? He has a bit of Shiism in his temperament. I have heard him privilege Ali. He understands music to have a role in devotion, Rohail. Does he simply wish to cast mazhab to the winds? Yeah? The self is dynamic, constantly changing. सुकून मुहाल है कुदरत के कारखाने में सबात एक तगय्युर को है ज़माने में. Permanence is impossible in the factory of nature. The only thing that remains permanent is change. And this self which is in flux, this dynamic self, also has a dynamic way of receiving the book. तेरे ज़मीर पे जब तक ना हो नुज़ूल किताब, until the book does not descend on your conscience, nothing will happen. The book directly has to be revealed to the reader the way it was revealed to the Prophet. It should not be mediated by your teachers. It should not be mediated by your parents. It should not be mediated by the larger culture. It's a direct relationship with the book. Then, the authority that Iqbal does not like is the authority of the mullah. And this is the authority he fears the most. Those who posture as religious authorities. Yeah? These are not the men of ilm. These are the ones who simply posture as men of ilm. Iqbal, we have to remember, straddles multiple worlds. Worlds of poetry. He's a lawyer. He considers himself Muslim. He's a colonial subject. He's a politician, represents Indian Muslims in 3 roundtable conferences. He hails from the state of Punjab, very much involved in the politics of Punjab in the 20s and the 30s. He's also a family man. Now, these multiple identities that all of us have at times are on a collusionary course with each other. So, one of the last things that I want to say is while Iqbal draws our attention to the aesthetics of minoritarianism and alienation, he also opens a moment of opportunity to understand the slips that can weigh his argument down, his own slips. And this takes us to the fascinating talk we heard yesterday from Qasim about the Ahmadi community. Iqbal's take on the Ahmadis in the 1930s is regressive, is problematic. When Iqbal becomes the inspiration, the ideological father of Pakistan, this take on the Ahmadis is frequently invoked. And little did Iqbal know, I mean, of course, Iqbal lived before the state of Pakistan was created, which was almost a decade after Iqbal's death. Little did Iqbal know that his take on the Ahmadis, which had to do a lot with the politics of Punjab, with the particular Ahrar movement, which was notorious for its bigotry, which was funding certain projects of Iqbal. Little did Iqbal know that the spaces that he opened for Muslims to think of themselves think of their communities in different terms, those spaces can also alienate certain Muslim communities. And this is something we must keep in mind. He frequently quotes a couplet of Ghalib, and since I began with Ghalib, I would like to end with Ghalib, and it's a telling couplet. Many of us can relate to it.